It's nice to be able to come and speak to you all, and lovely to see a lot of familiar faces. They're not ones that I necessarily know by name, but I feel like at this point, 2 years into Moscow, I've seen lots of you around. So it's nice to be here and be invited. And I don't know, are you giving chairs?
Yeah,
It looks like it to other folks. It's
Okay.
Moscow, so it's 5 after. That means I'm right here. So that, like, my students can count on an 8-minute delay from me. So, okay, so this was also a good opportunity for me to sort of make sure I was up to speed on what's going on, or maybe more accurately, what's not going on with respect to DREAM Act and DACA, and we'll kind of walk through what has been the immigration policy and some of the initiatives from Congress around this population of immigrants, and then what's kind of going on now. So I'm going to kindly see what's on the next slide. Okay, yeah. So we'll talk a little bit about DACA versus the DREAM Acts. These are different things, although affecting largely the same population of individuals in the United States. Who the folks are that are covered by DACA right now, what President Trump has tried to do, what the courts have then prevented him from doing, and where Congress sits now. And then I'll try to make sure that we have time for plenty of question and answer, but also I know a lot of this is somewhat technical and a little bit complicated, and it's been hard for even the immigration attorneys to keep track of the day-to-day changes in what's going on with our clients. So please interrupt me and ask questions as we go so that I can make sure that I'm actually providing the background information that you want, and that I'm not skipping over something that seems easy for, seems obvious for law students and maybe not outside of that room. Okay, so let's start sort of at the beginning here. So first off, and I'll actually kind of talk about the bottom bullet points here. So DACA stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. And so this is the Obama announcement. It was an executive order, not congressional action, not something that's actually law, a policy that was initiated by President Obama to basically say, we can't deport 12 million people, which is the approximate population of unauthorized immigrants in the United States. And we're going to choose among those 12 million people to focus our deportation efforts, our enforcement efforts on. And one group of people who will not be the center of the bullseye is this group, which is, and so basically created a set of characteristics and requirements that put about 1.3 million people outside the enforcement priorities for President Obama. Now, one thing I think is important to keep in mind under sort of the Trump era and everything that is sort of, for me anyway, the relentless news cycle around immigration under this presidency, President Obama actually deported way more people. So he deported the most individuals of any president ever, and deported over 2 million people in the course of his 8-year presidency. So while that ended up after some of these announcements, both in 2012 and then a major announcement in 2014, those numbers did start to decline. He still deported more people in I think in the last year of his presidency than the Trump administration did in the first year of his presidency. And there are reasons for that, and they actually have to do with choices around these priorities. Where President Trump has said, we're not prioritizing anybody for deportation, we're going after everyone. And that means they're spending time trying to deport people who have viable claims to asylum, viable claims to green cards through their relatives, and other kinds of relief under the immigration laws. President Obama kind of went after people that didn't qualify for those, and so it made it easier to deport more people. So, attach whatever judgment or assessment of those policy choices you want, but the hard numbers are markedly different. So under DACA, you had to, the announcement was made June 15th, 2012, and so a lot of the requirements have to do with the day of that announcement. So you had to be under the age of 31 on that date. And that's actually a pretty significant limitation. It's eliminated a lot of people from eligibility, including one of the sort of most prominent supporters, Jose Vargas, who sort of outed himself as a journalist at the Washington Post. He actually had turned 31 already, and so wasn't eligible for DACA. You had to come into the United States before your 16th birthday. You had to reside in the United States for 5 years at the time that that announcement was made. So you already had to have 5 years in, along with those age constrictions. And then you had to be present in the United States, right? You couldn't sort of be somewhere else and learn about DACA and be like, wow, I better get back into the United States because this thing's awesome, right? You had to be here on the day that it was announced. You also had to prove that you had no lawful status. And this was really interesting when the program first came out, because you were often trying to look for the deportation order for your clients to include in the application to prove that they qualified for DACA. And so when I talk about some of the reasons that people are not reapplying for DACA right now, a lot of it has to do with that. You're proving all the places that you ever lived. You're getting, well, we'll talk about that in a minute, but you're also proving that you're deportable. And you're handing all that information into the Department of Homeland Security, who is in charge of the immigration police, right? And so there was a lot of trust that you had to sort of have in that moment to apply for DACA. And it did take a while before people started applying in larger numbers. And nonetheless, so there's about estimates of about 1.3 million people who would be eligible for that, and only 800,000 ever applied for it. And so that's, that is sort of the difference in that, well, do I really believe that the immigration police aren't going to come after me or my family when I give them all of this information about myself, right? You also had to be in school or graduated from high school, or you had to show that you were, you didn't have to obtain a GED certificate. I mean, that worked, but you also could be in a GED program and showing that you were making progress towards accomplishing and getting that certificate. Or the other independent, sort of outside the school requirement, which is what we mostly know DACA about, is sort of young people who are in school. It was also partly in an effort to increase enlistment in the military. And so you could get the DACA benefits as a discharged veteran as well. And then there were lots of restrictions on any kind of criminal convictions. So you couldn't be convicted of a felony or a significant misdemeanor, which included DUIs, and anything for which there was a sentence of more than 180 days that was possible. So if you could be sentenced for more than 6 months, you were kicked out, right? You couldn't have that kind of crime. And then three or more other misdemeanors. The one thing that was kind of a benefit of this, and the way that the administration interpreted it, is lots of undocumented immigrants have many traffic violations. Like in Idaho, where you cannot get a driver's license, there will be people with many sort of infractions for driving without a license, or driving without insurance because they can't get insurance because they don't have the license to use to tie the insurance to. So those were sort of kicked out. They were like, we're not going to count traffic violations on this because that was just a product of people's unlawful status. But otherwise, any kind of other violation, disturbing the peace, things like that, you could only have up to 3 of those. Okay, the DREAM Act is a little bit different. So the DREAM Act, there have been a number of iterations, right? So this goes back a long time. We first saw it in 2001. And reintroduced, multiple times. It almost passed in 2010, and basically in the wake of that failure, the Obama administration announced this policy. It's been introduced again, and then we'll talk at the end of this presentation on kind of the attempts now in Congress to pass a DREAM Act. But it is significantly different it has always sort of showed up different. We'll talk about that in a minute in terms of the benefits. But it's also has an expanded eligibility frame, so that you had folks who arrived before 18 instead of 16, and then there wasn't that upper age cap of 31. And so there's a lot more people that have historically been eligible for the various forms of a DREAM Act than have ever been eligible for DACA. And so you have about 3.6 million people eligible for some kind of law if Congress ever passes the types of laws that have been proposed. So we can talk about then next kind of what DACA and the DREAM Act gives